There's a moment in MMA that still stings more than a knockout or a tap. It's not what happens in the cage, it's what happens in the corner. When a fighter sits down, looks their coach in the eye, and says, "I'm done." They don't stand up for the next round. They don't go out swinging. They quit on the stool. And in this sport, that's about as controversial as it gets. MMA fans and fighters alike have a complicated relationship with the idea of quitting. The culture celebrates warriors who go out on their shield. We cheer when someone takes a beating and somehow keeps going. But when someone decides not to answer the bell for the next round, that's when the judgment starts. People call it cowardly. They say the fighter gave up, but there's another side to it too. Sometimes it's not quitting, it's survival. We're diving into the rarest, rawest moments in UFC history where fighters made that call. Not because they were weak, but because they knew continuing meant something worse. Today, we're talking about the fighters who quit on the stool and what really happened in those corners. Before we get into it, one quick note. Raquel Pennington's fight with Amanda Nunes isn't on this list, not because she didn't try. To quit, she did, but her corner ignored her pleas, sent her back out, and she ended up getting finished in brutal fashion. That deserves its own story. Now, let's go back to season 11 of The Ultimate Fighter. Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz were coaching. Norman Paresi represented France, hoping to shake off all the old stereotypes about French fighters. In the cage, he faced James Hammertree. The first round wasn't close. Hammertree dominated, especially late. When Norman made it to his stool, he was gassed and looked like a man who didn't want to be there. He told coach John Hackelman he couldn't go back out. Said his legs were numb. His wrist hurt. Hackelman tried to convince him, but Norman said it again. He was done. Chuck Liddell was furious. The message was clear. Norman came in to break stereotypes, but in that moment, he only fueled them. Now take it back to the early 2000s, Pedro Rizzo versus Gan McGee. Rizzo was coming off back-to-back losses to Randy Couture, but he'd just knocked out Andrei Arlovsky. McGee was a giant, standing 6'10", and he looked like a real threat. The fight itself was slow, tentative. But right at the end of round 1, McGee landed a big shot that opened up a cut. As Rizzo walked back to his stool, he shook his head. His corner asked if he wanted to continue. He said no. It wasn't a doctor's stoppage. There was no official injury, just a fighter who knew he'd had enough. He even left the cage before the winner was announced. Fast forward to UFC 232. Petr Yan was on the rise, dangerous, sharp. He was still making his name in the division when he fought Douglas Silva de Andrade. Round 1 was competitive, but round 2? That was a beatdown. Yan turned it up and never looked back. On the stool between rounds, Andrade didn't protest. He quietly said he was done. His corner agreed. No arguments, no confusion. That was it. And to this day, few people even remember it happened. That's how clean and clinical the fight and the quit was. But not every stool quit is that quiet. Sometimes it comes after a beating that should have been stopped earlier. Enter CB Dollaway. He fought Khalid Murtazaliev in Moscow, stepping in on short notice. And from the start, things went south. Murtazaliev brutalized him on the ground, raining down unanswered shots. Referee Herb Dean let it continue far too long. By the end of the second round, Dollaway refused to sit. He just stood there and told the ref he was done. And this time, nobody criticized the fighter. Fans were mad, but not at him. They were mad at the officials for letting it go on that long. Another fight with a similar tone. Cynthia Calvillo versus Andrea Lee. Calvillo had once been seen as a top prospect, but against Lee, she looked like a shell of that fighter. Lee outstruck her with ease, landing nearly 100 clean shots. Calvillo sat down after round 2, took a breath, and said it was over. What made this moment different was the reaction. On commentary, Michael Bisping and Paul Felder backed her up. They said it wasn't weakness, it was awareness. She knew she was getting hurt, and she didn't see a path to win. That's not quitting, that's protecting your future. Then there's Nate Marquardt, veteran, former champion, a man who'd been in the game a long time. When he faced Kelvin Gastelum, it was clear the torch was being passed. Gastelum came in aggressive, younger, fresher. By the end of round 2, Marquardt sat down, looked his coach Trevor Whitman in the eye, and said he had nothing left. Whitman didn't hesitate. He told the ref it was over. Later, Marquardt said he maybe could have thrown a big shot and changed the fight. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was empty. And in that moment, that was all that mattered. And then, Chris Leben. If there was ever a guy you'd never expect to quit on the stool, it was him. Leben was known for his iron chin, his wild style, his willingness to take a shot just to land one. But in 2013, against Uriah Hall, things were different. Hall picked him apart from the opening bell, landing clean strikes and dropping him right at the buzzer to end round 1. Leben sat down, looked at his corner, and said, "I'm done, man." That was it. No one could believe it, but it was real. And it was the end of his UFC career. A guy known for never backing down, finally backed out. One of the most controversial moments happened with Max Roskopf. He was undefeated, 5-0, a promising grappler making his UFC debut on just 10 days' notice. He stepped in against Austin Hubbard. The fight started okay, but by the second round, Hubbard had found his rhythm. He was landing at will. In the corner, Max told his coach 9 separate times that he wanted to quit. His corner wouldn't call it. They kept pushing him. Eventually, Max told the referee directly, "I'm done." The fight was waved off. He was cut from the UFC after one fight. The backlash was enormous. But for a young man, in his first UFC bout, on short notice, against a tough opponent, he made the only call he could. Then, there's UFC 229, Pettis vs. Ferguson, the co-main event of one of the biggest cards in UFC history, 2 former champions. A war from the start. But after 2 rounds, Anthony Pettis had a broken hand. His corner, led by Duke Roufus, made the call. He wasn't going back out. Pettis agreed. Against a relentless pressure machine like Ferguson, going in injured would have meant disaster. The crowd may not have loved it, but Pettis lived to fight another day. And finally, the most iconic stool quit in MMA history. BJ Penn versus Georges St-Pierre, 2. Leading up to the fight, Penn promised he'd go to the death. He said he'd fight until he couldn't move. But after 4 rounds of GSP domination, after getting bloodied, battered, and overwhelmed, BJ didn't come out for round 5. His corner waved it off, and that was that. The quote lived on. The result? Not so much. GSP didn't just beat BJ, he broke him. And in that corner, in that moment, the warrior spirit took a back seat to reality. The truth is, quitting on the stool isn't weakness, it's a judgment call. These fighters know their bodies. They know when the damage is too much. They know when another 5 minutes could cost them months, or even years, off their careers. And sometimes they know when their heart just isn't in it anymore. So next time you see someone sit down and stay there, don't rush to judgment. Ask yourself, if it were you in that cage, what would it take for you to say, "I'm done"? Let me know what you think in the comments. Is quitting on the stool a smart decision? Or is it something a fighter should never do, no matter what? Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Because at Knock On, we're bringing you real fight talk, no sugarcoating. No sugarcoat.